welcome back Senator Kevin Cramer, Senate member from the great state of North Dakota. Senator Cramer, as always, sir, it's wonderful to see you. I mean, apart from what Kerry said, I want to get back to some of that stuff. Apart from what Rick Perry said, the fact remains fossils are part of everything we do 24/7 in our everyday lives. And Mr. John Kerry, bless his little mistaken heart, doesn't seem to understand any of this.
Well, Larry, he may understand it, but if he does understand it, he ignores it because he worships at the altar of climatology or somebody's paying his way or something. Because this is a guy that not only do I think he probably understands it, but ignores it, he completely ignores it in his own life. I mean, it's got to be one of the greatest stories of hypocrisy in the world is John Kerry with his multiple houses and jets and you know, big automobiles telling the rest of us we ought to take a subway to work because we need to save the planet. But to your point, and to answer your question at the end of that very impressive riff, is the answer is yes. That was the perfect point. Everything, Larry, and you named a whole bunch of items that are made with, you know, fossil fuels, but everything we produce, everything we grow, everything we manufacture, everything we export, everything we import requires moving the product, you know, producing the products, getting them to market. Literally, it is in the value chain of everything in the economy. This is why, by the way, core inflation is always a much lower number than inflation. We pretend like inflation is only 6.6% when we take out energy and food production. The reality is energy and food production are the two staples of everybody's lives. And that's why inflation is directly driven by energy policy.
That's why I loved what Mike Faulkner, who was in Mnuchin's Treasury, said last night. I mean, you're so right. Even, let's say, on the food side, you know, food at home, groceries rising 13% and so forth. Well, fertilizer plays a big role in that. Guess what fertilizer is based on? Fossil fuels. Now, look, you know, John Kerry is a very well-turned-out, well-manicured, well-dressed man. And I'm just looking down the list here. Clothes rely on fossil fuels. I wonder if he knows that. Clothes, and of course, I'm sure he's completely plugged in communicado. Phones rely on it. And I'm sure he's got those lovely teeth. Toothpaste relies on that. And you got to get to the airport for his private jets. So asphalt relies on fossil fuels. I mean, I'm being a little cheeky here, but I'm also, this is how ordinary people live their lives. And he wants to end it. Net zero. What does that mean, net zero?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question in and of itself. What does net zero mean as opposed to zero? Because I think the real goal is zero, period, that there'd be no greenhouse gas emissions. Now, of course, that means we have to stop exhaling. That means that you certainly can't eat a steak because those flagellating cows are such a problem. And, you know, that's why it's lunacy. And all for what? You cited the statistic. All for what? A reduction. By the way, we're talking about unilateral behavior now by the United States over a global problem. So we do, you know, wipe out the whole country, the whole continent, if you want. You still haven't really made a difference in climate and at a global level. So it's got to be, everybody's got to be in on it. And we have to be realistic. And you can't put people at the end of the value chain. I just think it's a massive political agenda, Larry, that has very little to do with climate itself. Yeah,
well, I suspect you're right. Let me go to a related matter. Now, John Kerry in Egypt was talking about making all these multi-development banks. He's especially on David Malpass's case on the World Bank, but he wants all these international development banks to become climate banks. And we have an ATM climate bank coming to a theater near you from this Inflation Reduction Act nonsense. I think it's going to be capitalized or something, $27 billion. And Senator Cramer, I just want to ask you what you thought of it, because, you know, the Energy Department has a big slush fund. If I'm not mistaken, the Interior Department has a big slush fund. We tried in the Obama years, didn't we, with Solyndra and all. They were running a little hedge fund. None of that stuff made out. The government's picking winners and losers. Do we need an ATM machine climate bank? Really? Is that essential to solving our economy?
Well, first of all, the answer is no. Second of all, it's much more complex than that anyway. I mean, what exactly is climate risk? Who's the benchmark? What's the formula? Nobody's really defined any of this stuff. They just throw the word out there and say, here's a big bank of money for poor countries to try to get to net zero or to invest in some things that the market itself won't invest in. The reality is the market has done a lot of good in reducing reducing greenhouse gas emissions, certainly here in the United States of America. And to the degree there are some new innovations or some emerging technologies that could use a little bump up, to get started, fine. But when you're subsidizing these same technologies 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, it doesn't seem like you're ever really getting there. You're just spending a whole bunch of money, which, by the way, ironically, to your point, this little ATM is going to be funded by the Inflation, quote, Reduction Act,
yes,
unquote. Obviously not, that's inflationary, not reducing inflation.
Can I just, last word, sir? You made a very important point, and I should have put it in my opening riff. The USA has the best record of reducing carbon emissions of any of the major countries. It's not as though we've stood there and done nothing. We've done a lot. You're right about technology. In fact, sir, I would argue it is our big oil and gas energy companies that have been major contributors to cleaner burning fuels and renewables to help bring carbon emissions down. I give you the last word, Senator Cramer.
That is exactly right. The cleanest barrel of oil comes from the Bakken of North Dakota. It comes from West Texas. That's why I like to say the Bakken is the solution, not the Spro. The Bakken reserves are better than the strategic reserves for lots of reasons. So no question, we do it cleaner, we do it better. And the problem, Larry, you and Secretary Perry, I think, touched on this. What they're really doing is killing the very innovators who will solve the problem. And so it's dumb on top of dumb, as I often say. And unfortunately, we're dealing with people who worship this stuff as opposed to think through it in a scientific and economical way.
Hey, listen, on the list, tennis rackets for me, golf balls for other people. I mean, this is terrific stuff. Fertilizers for farmers. Senator Kevin Cramer, the best of the best. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.